The dingo man arrived as scheduled with his dingo. I wasn't sure if he would come, as we had some rain overnight and there were more showers forecast for the day. The first hole at the top took about 5 minutes to do, and the second hole only took about 2 minutes. The third hole took a bit longer as we started to encounter the clay pan at about 500 to 600 millimeters down. That's about 2 feet in the old money. As I've said before, clay pan is literally rock hard. As time went on, I tried to add a little extra weight to the auger from time to time. It gave me a feeling of doing something to help, but the reality is that it made no difference at all. My plan was to bore all of the holes to a depth of 1 meter. In the end, we didn't achieve that in all cases, because there comes a point where the auger just will not cut through the rock. This highlights one of the limitations of using the dingo to bore these holes in this situation. Ideally, when you're trying to bore your way through clay pan, you really need at least a 1.5 ton digger to be able to apply enough downward force to make the auger cut through. Having said that, when the contractors were working at the neighbours, boring the holes for the poles for the retaining wall, they had a bigger digger than 1.5 ton and ended up bending the auger. They must have got a bit aggressive with it, and the auger bit into the clay pan. The auger stopped turning, but the hydraulic forces were still going, and they must have had the pressure relief set too high, so it just bent the auger. It seems the dingo is predominantly designed for pushing in the horizontal plane and lifting, rather than applying downward force. I say this because the engine, and thus most of the weight of the dingo, is towards the back, so that acts as a counterbalance to what is being lifted, or giving better traction also to the rear wheels or rear tyres for pushing. The dingo would be fine on the Heretaunga Plains, as it's a sandy loam soil for the most part and doesn't have the clay pan. On the hills of Havelock North, where we are, it's a different scenario because of the pan. The reason I went for the dingo is because of the restricted access. You can see that it's pretty tight in places, even for the dingo getting around, and you had to be really careful not to nudge things or, clout the top of the house or whatever. The grass, as I said, is wet, and the dingo was having trouble keeping traction. Once it had churned up the grass, the dirt underneath was even more slippery. It made holding position with the auger quite difficult. On the hole by where the garden was, the front right wheel was also fouling that wall, which made it a bit more difficult. Added to that, when the auger hits the clay pan, the tendency is for the dingo to go sideways, or more correctly for the auger to go sideways, and obviously the dingo goes with it. Think of it like when you're trying to put a screw in with a driver, and the screw goes sideways where the drive bit attaches to the screw. It's all about forces. If you put enough downward pressure on something and it can't go down, eventually something is going to go sideways. I can't remember which of the holes it was on this side of the compost bin, but with one of them, after the auger had been grinding away at the clay for 10 or 15 minutes, when he pulled it up to clear it, there was a waft of smoke came out of the hole, and the tip of the auger was very warm. There was quite a wide variance in the soil dryness across the holes. One of the ones next to the compost bin was particularly wet. I suspect this is where the water is being channeled on the top of the clay pan that made its way down to the head of the slip. None of the others were like that. The position of the clay pan, i.e. how far it is below the ground surface, also seems to be quite variable, as also is its thickness. That helps explain why with one or two of the holes we didn't hit the pan. Others we could bore through the pan, and others we stopped after about 150 millimeters or so of boring into the pan. By then we were about 700 millimeter down, so that was going to be sufficient for the posts. Holes done in part. As you probably observed, the dingo was having some trouble because the ground is wet. It's hard to maneuver it because it just keeps slipping, losing traction, and also because everything was on a slope. It's actually not that easy to get the holes straight up and down, and so I have got a bit of work involved. Straightening the holes is probably, just trimming the sides and that in places so that the the posts can go in vertically and also have a uniform, more or less, amount of concrete around them. But good to have that done. So that's taken him about 2.5 hours. You will have noticed that the dingo really struggled in places, and that's because of the clay pan. These last few holes he raced through fairly quickly because the clay pan's a lot lower down, which is why we had the slip where we did, because the water went down, hit the clay pan, and then carried on until it found a place to go. So I think it's, where are we? What did I say? 2.5 hours. So he got here about, so it must be about 11 o'clock or somewhere around there. Might be a bit after that. So that will be enough for this morning. I have covered all of the holes. That's mostly to keep hedgehogs out, and also any kittens that wander over from next door. We are also forecast to get some rain, so if I can stop the water, well, at least limit the water that tracks into those holes, that would be great. I don't really want all the holes full of water, but it's not the end of the world. So the next steps will probably be to go and purchase the posts and some of the tongue and groove board, because I will use the tongue and groove board to locate the posts at ground level, at least initially, so that I know that everything is in the right place as far as the posts are concerned, so that when I come to actually put the tongue and groove board on, I know that the posts are going to be where I need them to be. I have put the posts slightly less than 2 meters apart. Well, that's where I marked them. Where the holes have ended up remains to be seen. The reason for that is that I need to cut the end of the retaining boards on an angle, and so they come as 6 meter boards, but they are going to end up being shorter than 6 meters by the time I cut both ends. Alright, I think that's it for today. It's starting drizzly rain coming back, so I might do something else this afternoon. See you later. Bye.